Namaste to everyone. We have a very special guest with us today. This is Mayaram. Mayaram was born in a family of mixed faith. Her father was a liberal Hindu, while her mother was a Christian and a fanatic. Maya faced a tough childhood as her mother forced her to follow Christianity. Initially, Maya, like every other child, tried to sincerely obey their parents and try to follow Christianity. But after reading Bible, many questions and doubts arose in her mind. Whenever she approached her mother or pastor to clarify her doubts, she was either scolded for asking questions or was again asked to read Bible to get answers. In spite of this, Maya tried sincerely to follow Christianity. She was desperate to gain spiritual blessings and knowledge. But the religious customs of Christianity that was imposed on her by her mother did only brought her misery to mind, body, and life. Finally, one day, Mayaram saw a book of renowned Hindu saint Swami Vivekananda. After reading his book, she started feeling positive about her life. Slowly, without any external influence, she started learning about Hinduism and philosophy. Getting satisfied with the teachings of Sanatana Dharma, Maya started following the path without formally getting converted. Now, Maya is leading a peaceful, blissful life. So, today Maya is with us to share her life experiences briefly. Tell us about your family background.
I was born to two Indian immigrants who moved to the United States. My father is a Hindu raised in Chennai, but his family is originally from Andhra Pradesh. My mother is a Christian. Her mother, my Nani, was originally from Lucknow, UP, and her father, my Nana, was a Paligat Iyer from the area that borders Kerala now. My Nani's family were rich zamindaris based in both Delhi and Prayagraj, formerly Allahabad. They were converted during British rule by either American or British missionaries, I'm not sure. By the time my mother was born, Christianity had been in her family for 4 generations. Oddly enough, my mother was also raised in a mixed religion background, as my Nana did not formally convert to Christianity until close to his death. Nevertheless, she was raised a Christian. I was born and raised in the United States, except for 5 years living in Chennai in the 1990s. I have a younger brother. So growing up, my family was not, religion was not such a big deal. We were not raised in any religion explicitly. We neither went to the mandir nor the church. My mother told me when she was growing up, all she did was go to church, but that was it. Also, from what I can remember, my Nani was not particularly fundamentalist. She was quite low-key about it all. My Nainama and Tata, that's my father's parents, they were quite religious. However, my father went his own way and for a time even identified as atheist. He is not an atheist right now. But that might explain why initially religion was not such a big factor until later. But that's not to say Christianity was not a part of our lives even before we became officially Christian. Let me give you an example. So when we moved to India, my Nainama tried to get my brother and I to do puja. But when my mother found out, she was livid. Remember, in Christianity, idol worship is considered a grave sin. That might explain why she got angry. So even though we weren't raised with any religion initially, the bias was always towards Christianity.
There are many sects within Christianity. Which sect did you follow and who made you to follow this?
Although my mother was raised in the Methodist Church, she went into another Christian denomination later called Seventh-day Adventists, and that is the same one my brother and I were forced into. You see, in Christianity, over the years, there has been division upon division upon division. Just keep that in mind. There are many different denominations, or you can say jati, within the religion, no matter what missionaries and pastors tell you. A little background on the Seventh-day Adventists. So in 1844, there was a group called the Millerites in the United States. They believed that the world was going to end in that year itself. When the end of the world obviously did not come, they went on to form the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. The Seventh-day Adventists believe that we are living in the end times, in this century. They still believe that, even though the world did not end in 1844. They believe the true day of worship is Saturday, not Sunday, like most Christians believe. They also believe the Catholic Church is the Antichrist and will implement a one world government where we are all forced to worship on Sunday. When they do that, then Jesus will come to save his followers and destroy the unbelievers, including other Christians. My family eventually moved back from India to the United States, and we moved to California. It was there that my mother discovered the Seventh-day Adventists. At first, she would go to church on her own, but soon she started making my brother and I go to church. Eventually, she pressured us into getting baptized. I remember that day very well. The pastor came to our house to speak to my brother and I, and to make sure that we were making this decision on our own. And he also wanted to talk to our father, who objected very strongly, and he let the pastor know that we were only going to say yes because our mother was forcing us. He was right. She told us before the pastor came that she would not want a relationship with us if we chose not to get baptized. So what else could we say? I remembered that day very well when we got baptized. My nanny was also visiting from India. As we were getting immersed into the water, I remember seeing her crying tears of joy. Sure, we were not being raised in her denomination, which is Methodist, but we were now saved, and we were not going to be heathen anymore because we got baptized. Do you see, many Christians believe sincerely that if we do not accept Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior, then we are going to be punished by this God of Christianity for eternity, which means forever. That is what my mother also taught, although she was more harsh about conveying that. In her eyes, we would be considered heathen if we chose not to get baptized, and she would reject us and not have a relationship with us.
What is the reason for desire of missionaries to convert people belonging to other faith?
You might ask, where does this desire to convert other people come from? This desire to convert other people to Christianity has come from this belief in original sin. So the story goes in the Bible that this God created the first humans, Adam and Eve. They lived happily in the Garden of Eden and were told they could eat everything except the fruit from two trees, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. One day, then, a serpent told Eve that it was okay to eat from those trees if she did, and if she got Adam to eat from those two trees, then they would become like gods. They would have the same powers as this God that created them and created the Garden of Eden. So they ate from the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Then they realized that they were naked. Then they started to cover themselves up with leaves. When this God saw that they were doing that, he realized what they did, and then he banished them from the Garden of Eden, and he damned the future generations of Adam and Eve, which is all of us, all of humanity. He damned us all to eternal punishment. Later in the Bible, we see Jesus. Jesus supposedly is God in that form of Jesus. So God came down himself to die for our sins. That is why Christians tell us to accept Jesus as Lord and Savior, to save us from this God's punishment for eternity. Christians, especially the missionaries, they are very sincere in what they believe. They may sometimes use unethical measures like, bribing people with money, rice, food, schooling, medical care. But they sincerely believe they are doing a great service to humanity to convert people to Christianity. Just keep that in mind.
Tell us about your life after becoming a Christian.
After becoming a Seventh-day Adventist, I did my best to follow it sincerely. I prayed every day, I read the Bible, and I observed Saturday as the true day of worship. My mother became more and more fundamentalist. I could not do anything other than pray and go to church. My mother forbade us from doing homework or anything that was not considered godly on Saturday. For a time, we were even banned from reading fiction books or any other books that were not Christian. I always snuck around that ban, as I had to read books for school and also for pleasure. In fact, much of my time as a Seventh-day Adventist was a struggle between being a good Seventh-day Adventist and not wanting to follow unreasonable rules. So I lived a double life, in other words. My mother would occasionally find out and she would beat me, but by then I was used to her beating me, as she had done so since I was a young child. Like, she would beat me severely. My mother, in the meantime, began a course at an evangelism college with the hopes of becoming a missionary in India. I remember she would have me come sometimes to visit people, as she would go door to door. One incident I remember well. She went along with me and another Seventh-day Adventist originally from Nepal. We went to visit this single mother who was Gujarati, I believe. Now, I remember thinking at the time something was not right about this. They were preying on this vulnerable woman. Being the single mother is hard, and they were trying to get her to convert by helping her and talking to her. And that's how many Christians get people to convert. They offer this sort of help to people who are vulnerable, they're too far away from family, and they don't get any help from Hindu priests. They're not usually in the habit of helping Hindus who are in some sort of distress. When I went to university, I was able to have a little bit of freedom, and I stopped going to church. Eventually, even my mother stopped going to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, as she started following a breakaway sect of the Seventh-day Adventists called World's-Last-Chance, which is based in Australia. Nevertheless, I was still a believer, even if I felt like I wasn't the best believer, and I just had a hard time being a Seventh-day Adventist throughout.
What's your opinion about Bible?
Reading the Bible, which I did front to back more than once, raised more questions than it answered, and it gave me no comfort. How could I find comfort in contradictory verses in the Gospels, which are the books that were supposedly written by Jesus' disciples? In some verses, he would say, love your neighbor, and in other verses, he would say he was here to divide households, pit father against son, and that he would come with a sword. I got no moral instruction from reading any part of the Bible. Also, my interest in science caused me to question the biblical story for how the world was created. It says the world was created in 6 days. This is in the book of Genesis. It says the world was created in 6 days when we know that the earth is billions of years old. Science has proved that. And that all of humanity comes from 2 humans only. There are many stories of this God also killing all living creatures for being sinful, and also getting his so-called chosen tribes to mass murder other tribes. The Bible is full of this violent imagery and stories. How can it bring any comfort?
How did your mom or pastor reacted for asking doubts from the Bible?
I tried to ask my mother about the Bible, but she would dismiss my questions, saying that the Bible was enough to answer them. I tried to ask the pastor about my questions about the Bible, and he would say the same thing in a nicer way. You see, many pastors don't know how to answer their parishioners' questions. When they have training as a pastor, they may learn about Christianity and the Bible from sources other than the Bible, but when it comes to answering questions from their parishioners, they don't know what to say. They may feel that giving extra information would confuse their parishioners and cause them to leave the church. This is true in the US, but this would especially be true in India, where people just listen to the pastor and they're not inclined to question outside sources. They're just very gullible people.
What were your doubts in the Bible?
I had so many doubts, and I did not feel any different even though I was supposedly saved by Jesus when I became baptized. But I cast these doubts aside as I started to get busy with my schooling. I trained to be a nurse, and so I was busy with that training, and then eventually started to work full-time as a nurse. As my mother was getting deeper with this breakaway sect, World's Last Chance, she started to focus more on herself and less on me. But it still took a long time to break away from Christianity, and it involved breaking away from my mother. You see, my parents eventually divorced 2 years after we were baptized, my brother and I. So when that happened, she lost her income as she was a homemaker throughout their strained 21-year-long marriage. She then outright told me that I would be her main source of income from now on, and that is why she steered me towards nursing as a career. My father paid for my schooling during my undergraduate years, training as a nurse. First I was in California, then I transferred to another university in Colorado when my mother moved there. My mother would force me to forge tuition bills to include room and board for the dormitories, or hostels as they're called in India. But for much of that time I was attending university, I was living with her. I felt it was wrong what I was doing, as I was breaking one of the 10 Commandments, which is, "Thou shalt not steal." But in her mind, my father was a heathen and didn't deserve the dignity of being respected, including being stolen from. So in her mind, it was okay to steal from him. And that's what she had me do. I finished my nursing training and moved out of Colorado to North Dakota, another state. And then my mother eventually moved into my house after I had bought one there on my own. I worked for many years, but then decided to pursue further studies for graduate school. Once again, she asked me to steal money my father had agreed to pay for my graduate studies, and she wanted me to give that money to her. I was in a very dark place. I thought I had escaped from being a thief, but I didn't. I felt suicidal. I prayed for this God to save me from sinning like this and to keep me from committing suicide. I didn't commit suicide, as I am here right now, but no help came to save me from sinning like that by stealing, and so I started committing this fraud again. I did this for 2 years, then reached a point where I had to take matters into my own hands. I told my mother, "Enough, I'm not going to do this anymore." I then told her to move out of my house for good. I had to get a lawyer involved because it had the potential to get messy. She was threatening to sue me in court. Eventually, I did get her out. At that time, she was dividing her time evenly between India and the US. But after I told her to leave, she moved to India full time. She currently lives in Nainital. As I was working with the lawyer to break away from her cleanly, I suddenly realized I no longer had to be a Christian anymore, whether Seventh-day Adventist or another denomination. I realized I didn't have to call myself a Christian anymore. At that time, I was not going to church or doing anything serious. I then got rid of my Bible and any other Christian books or videos that I had, and I donated them.
Do you think Christianity is the main reason for family of mixed faith getting separated?
Many people ask if Christianity is a reason why mixed religion marriages break apart. I would say, in my opinion, yes. If a Christian or even a Muslim insists on having their spouse convert or raising their children as Christian or Muslim, it can strain the marriage. If any Hindu is in a mixed religion relationship and has plans to marry, then they need to talk about these things before marriage and starting a family. At the very least, the Hindu should get their Christian or Muslim significant other to agree to not force their religion on their children. However, chances are slim they would ever agree to that from the start, or won't change their minds in the future as they get older and more fearful of being tortured in hell for eternity for having heathen children, or for their children being tortured in hell for being heathens. That's why it can be a problem later on, even if initially they didn't care about their religion before. I can say about my mother, she was very dissatisfied with her life. She didn't care to be serious about religion before, but then as her life progressed, she became increasingly agitated with where she was going, and then she came upon this strict Christian denomination that made her feel like it gave her a purpose, made her feel like she was the only one that knew the truth. She always had a superiority complex to begin with, and as she got older, it got worse and worse, and then the Seventh-day Adventists have just fed into it. She also saw my brother and I as mere extensions of herself, not as our own people, which is another reason she wanted us baptized, and wanted us to bend to her will. Her character is as such, but it was only made worse by the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, I would also say Christianity as a whole.
What's your overall opinion about Christianity?
I have a decidedly negative view about Christianity now, given my experience. At first, my dissatisfaction had to do with some followers of Christianity, including my mother, especially my mother. It has now grown to the entire religion, whether it's the Seventh day Adventist denomination or the Catholic Church. It's the entire religion. And I realize now, if not for forced conversion over the centuries, Christianity would only be limited to the Middle East and wouldn't grow beyond that area to 2 billion followers all around the world. There has been forced conversion starting in Europe, then extending to North America, South America, parts of Africa, and Australia. If people paid attention to the Bible, just the Bible alone, I believe, would dissuade many people from Christianity. It just doesn't make sense. It's amazing India has not been fully converted. But I see now what the damage missionaries are doing, especially in the Northeast and South India. I had no idea how bad it was. I don't believe the percentage of Christians is 2%. It has to be more like 6 to 7%. So there is this slow change of demographics that has created a ticking time bomb.
In what way Swami Vivekananda inspired you?
For about a year after I dealt with the fallout of separating from my mother and from Christianity, I was an atheist. Or at the very least, I had decided I would identify with no religion. Then one year, as I was visiting my father in California, I saw on his bookshelf a biography of Swami Vivekananda by a French author, Romain Rolland. I was just impressed that a young monk traveled halfway around the world in 1893 to speak about Hinduism in a country where the notion of different religions was not entertained. In that era in the United States, you could either be a Christian or you were cast out of society. He spoke bravely and was the first to establish ashrams in the United States, even gaining followers like Sister Nivedita. I originally thought that ISKCON was the first to bring Hinduism to the United States during the 1960s, when the hippies were exploring Eastern spirituality. One quote by Swami Vivekananda impacted me quite a bit. Vedanta recognizes no sin, only error. And the greatest error of all is that to say you are weak, that you are a sinner, and that you have no power, and that you cannot do this or that. This goes against the doctrine of original sin. It made me realize that I had a lot more control of my spirituality than I thought. I still feel very new to Dharma though. There is this Vedic principle of neti neti, not this, not this. That is at the level I'm at right now. This method has helped me to deconstruct Christianity and has led me to learn more about the religion outside the Bible and outside other Christian books. I read Rajiv Malhotra's book Being Different, and his explanation about the desert versus forest civilization helped explain why this God of Christianity was so harsh and hateful. It's because the early Jewish people were shaped by the harsh environment of the desert, whereas the rishis that dictated the Vedas, they were shaped by the forests, which has trees and shade. I have also read a few other books, including this one I want to show here. This is Jesus Interrupted by Bart Ehrman. This book that I showed, it shows the contradictory views of Jesus between the different Gospels, and that who we think wrote the Gospels in the Bible were actually written by different people hundreds of years later, after Jesus' death, supposedly. So, in other words, everything I learned about Christianity has turned out to be false.
Have you read any Hindu scriptures or philosophy?
I started to read the Panchama Veda, that's the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, who was Swami Vivekananda's guru. The school of thought they propagated, of course, was Advaita Vedanta. The notion of being one with the divine rather than looking up to some god in the sky and me being here on earth has appealed to me because I was raised in a dualistic religion. I also practiced passage meditation, which is separate from the Ramakrishna mission. It was pioneered by one Eknath Eshwaran, who was originally from Kerala. So you take a passage from, say, the Bhagavad Gita, and you memorize it to silently chant in your head during meditation, along with your mantra. I also take part in satsang with a local study group for the Ramakrishna mission.
How it feels to live as a Hindu?
I have embraced Hindu Dharma, although I have not formally converted back. I don't know of any temple where I live that does Garvapsi. Nevertheless, my life has changed since embracing Sanatan Dharma. I feel more at peace and less fearful of eternal torture for rejecting Christianity. I also feel it is a duty to warn people about the true nature of Christianity so that more gullible people are not converted. Sanatan Dharma may be the eternal truth, but enough people convert and become radicalized this heritage may be lost forever and humanity will be worse off. People in Europe and the United States are walking away from Christianity, and missionaries and pastors are depending on people from India and the rest of Asia and Africa to fill their ranks. All I can say is to Hindus, do not become one of those.